All right, good morning, folks. Thank you all for joining me for this morning's winter climate outlook for South Central Texas. My name is Keith White, and I am a meteorologist and our climate services leader at the Weather Service office serving Austin and San Antonio. And like usual, I'd like to start with a quick overview of some of the more notable winter events from last winter. Many of you will remember just before Christmas, a very strong cold front moved through in late December of 2022, bringing extremely cold temperatures to the region, the kind of cold that we really only see in this part of the country these days about once per decade. But of course, you'll all remember that we've now seen that kind of cold twice over just the last 3 winters. That particular cold front didn't come with wintry precipitation like we had during the extreme week of winter weather in February of 2021. However, just a little over a month later, we did have a significant ice storm impact the hill country and the Austin metro area, extending into northern portions of the San Antonio area, where as much as 3/4 of an inch of ice accumulation led to significant impacts. The first day of the event was mainly drizzle. There was a ton of auto accidents on roadways in the Austin metro area. Then the second day brought the more significant ice accumulations and the power impacts as the weight of that ice on trees and on power lines, ended up bringing down a lot of them. Arguably the most significant ice storm our region has seen in several decades. A little bit more recently, just looking back at this past fall, which meteorologically, of course, is defined as September 1st through November 30th. We did have, as we've seen for much of the year, above normal temperatures on average through the fall, thanks to a very warm September and October. November actually finished as only the second month this year for many locations with on average below normal temperatures. However, at least so far in December, we've returned right back to an average of above normal temperatures, and that's likely to continue, as I'll talk on in just a moment. And then with the exception of one heavy rain event in late October that really only had significant impacts for areas in our northern hill country counties. There were some reports of flash flooding and river flooding on the Llano River and then out on the Nueces. But for the 3-month period ending December 1st, the vast majority of South Central Texas actually did still have below normal rainfall, with the exception of some pockets in the Austin area and then some smaller, less notable pockets of slightly above normal rainfall over that 90 days. And sort of wrapping it up, for at least some locations, in Del Rio, for instance, it was significantly warmer than normal. The rainfall varied from location to location quite a bit. Unfortunately, the San Antonio area has been very dry for now the past 2 years. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second as well. And then also notably, during that significant rain event in October, we did also have 5 confirmed EF0 tornadoes in the region, mainly from San Antonio eastward, including one that went right through the city of San Antonio back on October 26th. After that rain event, it's been pretty dry. This is the actual rainfall estimated over the past 30 days, and really almost nobody has seen an inch of rain over the past month. At least in this time frame, San Antonio has received more rain than most other locations, but that's still only just over a ½ an inch. And most of the rest of our region has seen less than a ½ an inch of rainfall over the past 30 days. And looking at that in terms of the percentage of normal, as we're sort of heading into a drier season anyway, still significantly below normal, even in those areas that received over a ½ inch of rain. Over longer time frames, over the last 90 days, still seeing some of that above normal rain from the October event in portions of the hill country, but most of the region below to significantly below normal, even some patches of less than half of our normal rain dating back over the last 90 days. And this is valid this morning. And then over the last half a year, 6 months or so, the area of less than half of the normal rain over that 6-month period is expanded over much of central and eastern portions of south central Texas, with really only a few splotches of above normal rainfall still, holding on over that time period. So looking at this in another perspective in terms of I've got these out of order. I'll go back and forth. This slide is the year-to-date departure from normal, so giving the amount of rain that we've missed out on compared to the 30-year averages. And you can see that especially from San Antonio northward into the hill country and then up in Williamson County, much of that area has seen at least 8 inches less than usual for this year, with some splotches of more than a foot in red there below normal just this year in 2023. For San Antonio International Airport, about a foot below normal there for this year. But if we look back at last year, they were also significantly dry over some of these same areas. In fact, at this time last year, it was the second driest year on record, year to date at San Antonio, with nearly 20 inches rainfall deficit at that time. And so these two things combine to leave long-term drought conditions in place. And so as of the latest drought monitor just released this morning, we can see that the extreme or D3 drought in red remains over much of the I-35 corridor and hill country, covering about 25% of south central Texas. This is, for some areas, an improvement over where we were at 3 months ago at the start of fall. But those long-term deficits aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And in fact, the drought outlook released at the end of last month shows that there should be some improvement through the course of this winter. By the end of February, some of these peripheral areas that are only in that D1 moderate droughts are pretty likely to see some improvement over the course of the winter, although drought conditions are expected to continue through the winter and likely into the springtime months for much of the central portions of our region that remain in these very long-term significant deficits. And those have impacts that continue. I'll start here with this image on the left. That's the 14-day average stream flow averaged over some of our river basins, and you can see where many of these basins are in the red here is very low or below the 10th percentile for this time of year. The browns here are low or below the 25th percentile for this time of year. Really only a few of our basins have normal stream flow for December at this time, even after some of the fall rains that we've seen. In addition, obviously, reservoirs remain significantly low. I'm not showing Medina Lake, but Medina Lake is only about 3.5% full at this time. That basin has seen very little rain over the last few years. And Canyon Lake, which is only 61% full as of today, is at its lowest record since it was filled in the 1970s. And even some of the rains that we saw this fall didn't really do much to put a dent in those lake levels. And the same goes for many of our highland lakes. Lake Buchanan is only about 45% full at this time. And of course, the Edwards Aquifer as well, as I'm showing here, the Uvalde well and the Bexar County well, showing an uptick after some of our fall rains, but the Bexar County well is still 30 feet below its December average, and really almost no improvement shown on the Uvalde well this fall. This graph, of course, going back to the late 2000s and showing, the strong drought we had in the early 2010s, and then the improvement we had in 2015. Some more variability in the Bexar well than in the Uvalde well, but clearly been on the downtrend for the past few years, and a long ways to go before we make up for those long-term deficits that I showed earlier. There's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll remind folks I will be sending out a PDF of these slides, a link to the presentation sometime later this morning. But this just kind of shows the frequency of snow events that we see in our region. Typically, we see measurable snow or greater than or equal to 1/10 of an inch anywhere from about every 2.5 to every 5 years across South Central Texas. And an inch or more is really only an 8 to 10 year recurrence interval for our part of the country. Of course, we all remember the last time we saw significant snow was in February of 2021. Don't necessarily expect to see anything like this again anytime soon, but of course, this just kind of shows the kinds of extreme events that we can see in South Central Texas and should be aware of. And then looking at the climatology of our long-term averages. First, on the right, severe weather. Obviously, winter is not a big severe weather season for South Central Texas. You can see in the orange, reports of hail do tend to start to tick upwards in late February as we head into spring. And we do see occasional, flash flooding reports or also, weak tornadoes in South Central Texas, but not very many. They're relatively rare in the winter months in our part of the country. And then in terms of temperatures and precipitation, obviously we're sort of reaching the bottom of our 30-year daily temperature averages. High temperatures average typically in the lower 60s in this part of the country this time of year. Low temperatures generally in the lower 40s. But once we get into January, we'll of course start our slow upward trend into the spring and the summer months. And then rainfall wise, especially out along the Rio Grande, you can see Del Rio here in the middle, very dry in the winter typically. In Austin and San Antonio, drier than we see in the fall and in the spring, but we do typically still average somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.5 inches in Austin and just shy of 2 inches most months in the wintertime in San Antonio. Looking at our freeze climatology, this is sort of an average of when most locations can expect to see their first winter freeze. We have now discontinued our freeze warning program here for our office. We did have our first widespread killing freeze of the season earlier this week, with temperatures even falling to freezing within the city of San Antonio itself, which if you look at the map here is even slightly later than those long-term averages. But at this point, we won't be issuing any more freeze warnings as our first widespread killing freeze is now behind us. So changing gears and talking about ENSO, as many of you know, the El Nino La Nina cycle has significant predictability, and it does also have impacts on the weather and really the average weather or climate that we experience here in South Central Texas in the winter time. So the December probabilities looking out over the course of the winter, next spring, and even all the way through next summer were just issued this morning. Clearly, we remain in an El Nino, and it's not expected to go anywhere anytime soon. But climatologically, we do typically see those sea surface temperature anomalies in the Eastern Pacific start to wane. So here's a look at about a week ago, the sea surface temperature anomalies, meaning the difference from average at this time of year. And you can see these warm colors across the Central and Eastern Pacific. That's really definitive of an El Nino state. So like I said, we'll be stuck there for a little while. As we head towards the July, August, September period, looks about 50-50 in terms of whether we'll be in a neutral or a La Nina. Although these outlooks don't go out very far, the general consensus is we are leaning towards the potential for a La Nina in fall and winter 2024 to 2025. It's far too soon to have any type of certainty on that. But unlike La Nina and the multi-year La Nina that we just got out of, El Nino events are less typical to continue into a second year. So regardless of whether or not we see a La Nina or not, the other choice would be a neutral state. We're very, very unlikely to have 2 straight years of El Nino once we get into next fall. But for now, we'll look at the potential impacts of an El Nino winter here. Although it works alongside other teleconnections and long-term trends, typically an El Nino state leads to an extended Pacific jet stream that's further south than in an average winter, and that typically leads to wetter than normal conditions in South Central Texas. We haven't necessarily seen that so far this year, and part of that is because the signal from El Nino itself can sometimes be dominated by those other modes of climate variability. One thing that that's different this year is just how warm sea surface temperatures are really everywhere in the oceans. I'll go back to this sea surface temperature chart, and yes, we do have a clear El Nino state, but warmer than normal waters are in place over the vast majority of the Earth's oceans at this time. Really the difference is in the Southeast Pacific, and then a few other splotches, across the global oceans, but generally a much warmer average state than what we would normally see, and that may have some impacts on the weather patterns that impact us here in the continental U.S. So we can learn a lot from the past, and here's a look at a breakdown of some of the 7 strongest El Niños since 1950. And this is a look at averaged over CPC climate regions, the precipitation departure from average. And you can see, almost every year, with the exception really being the 2015-2016 Super Nino, we do see above normal precipitation in our region, or in some of these regions near normal. But that varies quite a bit in terms of the amount of excess precip we can receive and where that ends up. In 82-83, it was very wet over Louisiana and Mississippi, but only slightly wetter than normal here in South Central Texas. Whereas 91-92 was an incredibly wet winter for us here in our region. And for this reason is why our climate outlooks are in a probabilistic sense. We can't have 100% certainty over what the climate state is going to look like over a 3-month period, but we can have an idea as to which way things lean. So here's sort of a composite of 5 of those strong El Niños. And you can see for our regions here, there is a lean towards above normal precip, maybe not quite so much over the Edwards Plateau. But precipitation obviously is the thing that we care the most about right now, given those long-term deficits, the drought conditions in place that have been here for a long time. We hear it from the public on a daily basis. We need rain, and we certainly do. Unfortunately, at least over the course of the next 3 months, we're not expected to see nearly as much as we need to see. I'll switch gears briefly to talk a little bit about these breakdowns over just one of those regions, over this region right here that I'm outlining that covers Austin and San Antonio, as well as much of the rest of Central Texas. And we'll focus in just on the right side of each of these graphics. That ONI greater than 0.5 is the Oceanic Nino Index and indicates a composite of the data from all of the years within an El Nino state. And so we do see those odds tilt towards above normal precipitation. And this star here means that data is statistically significant. However, when we look at trend adjusted temperature data, meaning we've taken out the trend due to climate change, there's not really a strong signal between seeing near normal temperatures or above normal temperatures in an El Nino year. We can say, with pretty high certainty, we're probably not going to see a cooler than normal winter this winter. But it is possible in an El Nino to still have warmer than normal temperatures, largely due to that trend from climate change. And then really quickly, I'll explain what these graphs are for those that might not be familiar with box plots. So these are the same, average over that same San Antonio region, and we're looking at temperature here on the left, precipitation on the right. This middle line is the average, or the 50th percentile. Then the box is bounded by the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. And then the lines at the end are the 10th and the 90th percentile. So you can think of 90% of years as having average temperatures that fall within this range, 50% of years have average temperatures that fall within this range. And so you can see a clear trend towards cooler temperatures in those El Nino years, but quite a bit of variability. You can have a warm, El Nino year that's even warmer than a 75th percentile El Nino year. You can see that trend even more strongly in terms of precipitation. El Nino years do end up wetter than normal, significantly so, and can be very, very wet with this 90th percentile value well above 12 inches for that region. But again, you could also see a much drier year that looks a lot more like a La Nina year would. So this just kind of goes to show the strong variability in weather that we see in South Central Texas, even regardless of the phase of the El Nino La Nina cycle. I'll also talk briefly about severe weather. Again, I showed earlier, we don't see a lot of severe weather here in South Central Texas. And despite a small sample size, we do see at least some trend in both hail and tornadoes during El Nino years. So again, we're not entering a severe season by any means, but it is worth noting that during El Nino winters, it's possible we could see an above normal instance of severe weather, especially with respect to hail and tornadoes. And again, this would be mainly something to think about late in the winter months as we head into the second half of February is when we would be more likely to be dealing with this kind of weather. I'll wrap up here by talking about the Climate Prediction Center outlooks. First here is the week 2 outlook around Christmas time. And there's a very strong signal for most of the United States to see warmer than normal temperatures heading into Christmas. For those of you traveling back to the Midwest or the Northeast, it's starting to look pretty unlikely that even some areas that regularly see white Christmases will see one this year, unfortunately. And of course, down here in Texas, we've never seen a white Christmas in Austin or San Antonio. That's unlikely to change this year. But we do at least have a low chance of maybe some rain for that week, the 21st through the 27th. Too early to have any sort of confidence. And these 33 to 40% chances are not really that meaningful, unfortunately. On the seasonal scale, looking at December through February, obviously we're already 2 weeks into December, but when we wrap things up at the end of February, it's pretty likely that average overall temperatures in our region won't differ too much from long-term averages. Probabilistically speaking, there's, especially over North Texas, a good chance for near normal conditions, which differs slightly from the definition of equal chances. The equal chances means that there's a 33% chance each of below normal, above normal, or near normal. We will, in the winter, our highly variable season, we will see cold periods. We will see warm periods. It's just that when you average that all up over the course of the winter, it's unlikely that either one will overwhelm the other for our part of the country. And then lastly, for precipitation, I wish I had better news on this front, but really, near the Rio Grande, equal chances again of below, near, or above normal precipitation, and then only a slight lean towards above normal precipitation for most of the rest of our region. Even for areas off to the east of Austin that are in this 40 to 50%, really only about a 42% chance of above normal precipitation. Meanwhile, a 33% chance of near normal and a 25% chance still of below normal precip. So all of this adds up to say that our long-term drought isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and there is still a chance that we could see a drier than normal winter, which would be much less than ideal and would set us up for pretty bad conditions in the spring in terms of agricultural impacts and fire weather impacts. At least for right now, we don't anticipate that to be the case, but we do have to consider that possibility given these probabilistic outlooks. For now, we are sort of leaning into that potential for above normal precip, especially over our eastern areas. And so for our fire weather outlook, nothing really to worry about over the course of the next couple of months. It's not a fire weathery season, for lack of a better term. But the National Interagency Coordination Center outlooks that are issued on the 1st of every month do anticipate below normal significant wildland fire potential by February. And so we'll cross our fingers that that holds over the course of the next couple of months. And after a couple of really active fire seasons, we definitely want to not have to deal with that again in 2024. So then to wrap up, I show this impacts outlook summary every year or every season, and sometimes we have a pretty good idea that some of these impacts could be significantly below or significantly above normal. That's not necessarily the case this time around, just given the weaker climate signals overall and the conflicting climate signals. But given the antecedent dryness, we do expect below normal impacts from heavy rain, flash flooding, and especially river flooding over the course of the next couple of months. We'll need to keep a close eye on that as we head towards spring, though. Obviously, spring is our wetter season. We have had some significant flood events during El Nino springs in South Central Texas. So stay tuned. In a few months, I'll give our spring outlook, and we may have more to talk about on this front. Fire weather, anticipating below normal impacts for the time being, but again, we'll need to watch closely for any possible changes next spring. And then severe weather, near to potentially slightly above normal impacts, but again, it's not a very stormy season for us. And then lastly, winter weather, expecting the near normal potential. Most of our very impactful winter events, thinking things like the ice storm last year, February 2021, the snowfall of record in San Antonio in 1985, all happened during a La Nina winter. However, we do still see winter events here during El Nino, and we'll need to watch out for that potential. But our long-term averages, like I showed earlier, we typically don't see a lot of significant winter weather in our region. Most of our winter weather events are confined to the hill country. Many of them are mixed precipitation events where we see a mix of maybe drizzle and freezing drizzle or changing over to sleet. Sometimes also snow, but again, measurable snow only once every 2.5 to 5 years for much of our region. And for locations in our southern counties, the coastal plains, the Rio Grande plains, even less frequently than that. And I'll wrap up here now. I did put a note on here. For those of you who may have missed it, the 5th National Climate Assessment was recently released. This is the government's preeminent report on climate change impacts, risks, and responses in the United States. It's a congressionally mandated effort that occurs every 4 years. There are chapters broken down by regional impacts, so there's one specific to the Southern Plains states of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, as well as chapters broken down by specific topics like water, human health, agriculture,